Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining us tonight, and I do appreciate you spending this next hour with us, and I hope that you are safe and well and taking care of yourself and each other. I'll get right to it. My opening observations are this. Take a look around. Tell me what you see. I see a world filled with race and bigotry. Take a look around. Tell me what you see. I see a world filled with hate and hostility. So in the streets we cry because our babies die from all the guns and all the violence. And we lift our hands and raise our demands, but the violence is not silenced. Oh Lord, we need you right now. And those are my opening observations. So welcome to the Kelly Wright Show. Joining me right now, well, first I should say this. We're all dealing and grappling with the situation that's unfolded in Minneapolis and other cities where we see protests that have turned ugly and violent and disruption of property going against the good wishes of some very good people. And that is the family of George Floyd, the gentleman who died with a police officer having his knee on his neck. We're all gripped by that, and we're saddened by it, and we're angered by it. But the violence is something that the George Floyd family has said, please do not do this. Please honor George Floyd. And then there's a situation with attorney Ben Crump, who was on this show yesterday, who also talked about the same issue, as well as stating that while it appears to be open season on Black men and women and children, it is not good for us to resort to violence. But the gentleman I'm bringing in now, we're going to have a panel discussion on how we should respond as Black citizens in dealing with police matters. And so I have with me Dr. Geoffrey Mountbarner. He is an ER physician working in the Washington, D.C. area in Maryland and Virginia suburbs, and he's very actively engaged in treating COVID-19 patients. He knows what's going on in terms of the coronavirus, but he also writes about police matters and its impact and effect on African-American communities and the distrust and mistrust that exists on both sides. Then we have Judge Ronald Gregg. He is the former general counsel, assistant general counsel for the NAACP. He is in Staten Island, New York, and he's also a retired law enforcement officer who worked his way into law and became an administrative judge. In addition to that, he does a lot of work in the community there in Staten Island as head of the Black Chamber of Commerce. And then we have Bobby Kipper, another good friend of mine. Bobby, of course, I've known for many years, having worked in the Virginia Beach area and Hampton Roads. He is a retired police officer of some 30 years. He has also worked with the Attorney General's Office of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and he's also contributed to the former Bush administration in terms of gang violence and mediation. He is actively engaged as the founder of the National Center for the Prevention of Community Violence. And certainly all three of these gentlemen can add to what's going on right now, and we can discuss our legitimate concerns. So Doc, I'll begin with you. You're treating COVID cases, and you said something to me just yesterday about the protests that we're seeing. And you said, Kelly, the fact that there is a high anxiety and stress level amongst those people who have chosen to protest and demonstrate in this way, it makes them susceptible to coronavirus because the high stress levels weakens their immune systems. And I was struck by that. And if you could just elaborate on that before we get deeper into this subject matter.
Sure. Mr. Wright, thank you so much for having me on your show this evening. And thank you for the other guests. Just real quick, as you all know, I'm a board certified emergency medicine doctor who's practicing on the front lines. What I was sharing with Kelly, which I've been talking about since March, is that as a result of the COVID virus, many of us are just stressed anyways. Now, when we have increased levels of stress and fear, it causes an increase in a naturally occurring hormone that we all have called cortisol. When your cortisol level rises, it causes transient decreases in your immune system, therefore making you more susceptible to the COVID virus, the COVID symptoms as well. And in the spirit of us all being in this together, now all of a sudden we have a disenfranchised group of people who are more stressed and more fearful. And here we have COVID as well. And so we're all in this together, which means that we all have to figure out a way of moving this ball forward. And by the way, I like to give my, I'm so sorry to the family, to the Floyd family, and to all those who are enduring this moment as well.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. And we all are deeply moved by this. Bobby, I want to go to you now because what the doctor is talking about, the stress level as it relates to COVID-19, but then we have a pandemic, but within the pandemic, we have an epidemic of systemic racial overtones that have been going on in this country. And we haven't talked about it. You and I talk about it, and we're not afraid to talk about it and have a dialogue on race, but that stress level also spills over to police departments. And I'm just looking at the trajectory of all this. Are we seeing more stress levels within police departments as a result of that? They're not handling their stress well to de-escalate a situation so that we don't have an unfortunate situation as we saw with George Floyd.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for having me this evening. And I think that's absolutely true. I think there are a number of things that lead to, stressors and acting out behavior in all people. And the doctor is absolutely right. I mean, when you have a combination of stressors, law enforcement obviously is on the front lines. And we have to admit that there are times when humanistic behavior comes in and decisions are wrongly made. And that obviously has happened in this situation. I would also give my condolences to the family and to the family of all those who suffer at the hands of what we feel is injustice. But we also have to make this a systematic approach. We can't, everybody wants to throw, something pop at the situation and think that that's going to solve it. These issues are deep rooted. You and I have talked about this. They're deep rooted not only in our society, but they're deep rooted in the various ways that we act out our behavior toward one another. What we have to do is we have to do a better job of systemic training for all people who are going to be involved in handling these issues on the front line. I think what we've done is when these situations happen, there's going to be a lot of attention to this right now for about the next 30 to 60 days, and then we'll all go back in our holes and everything will be the same. We threw training out there such as implicit bias training, things like that. They really just point out an issue, but they don't system-wide approach the issue to really training the way that it should be trained. So I have some concerns about our selection process, our training process moving forward, and we need to focus on both those issues to really get out of this issue.
We'll be back with more of our panel discussion on how we should be interacting with police and police interacting with members of the African American community in just a moment. Judge Ronald Gregg, Bobby's talking about something that all of us are familiar with, and that's the selection process of who becomes a police officer. And just for the record, let me state there are a lot of good law enforcement officers out there. Two of you were among the law enforcement department and working very hard and very well. But there are some road cops out there who come in with perhaps an inherent implicit bias. Judge, you've worked in Staten Island. You were there, and I find it striking that we're talking about George Floyd's death, who said, "I can't breathe," and you're there in Staten Island, where in 2014, Eric Garner was a man taken down into police custody, was saying, "I can't breathe." He said it several times. And how long must we continue to see this kind of egregious, outrageous pattern take place?
Well, thank you, Mr. Wright, for inviting all of us here to have a dialogue. But you're very, very correct. This situation, it seems to be a recurring situation within the African-American community. And unfortunately, I was a member of the NAACP on their local board, and I was at the conference when Eric Garner was murdered, and we wrote a edict against the New York City Police Department, and it took almost 6.5 years for Paglione, the officer who had killed Eric Garner, to be terminated and fired. But the problem is, the solution is not firing rogue or bad cops. The solution, as Bobby stated, is to have some type of systematic training, because these individuals that are killing local Blacks are having their jobs taken away, but they still have their life and freedom. So how do we address this disproportionate response? I have to compliment Mayor Jacob Free in Minnesota for firing the individuals, but we are now waiting to hear from, I think his name is Freeman, Mike Freeman, who's the county attorney, to make a decisive decision on whether or not to charge these individuals. And clearly, it may not have been intentional, but it rises to the level of a negligent homicide or manslaughter on the part of the individual officer who had taken the life of George Floyd. So how do we address this? It can't be addressed by closing the barn door, firing someone for rogue police action. It has to be addressed in the police academics, in the training, and also, I would hazard to say, in the selection process. There has to be, I remember when I went to the interview for the police department, there was a psychologist who was questioning, querying me about my upbringing, my background. But there has to be a focus so this implicit bias is weeded out, or at the very least, the individuals that have this and harbor this type of attitude and conduct are weeded off the police department. If you look at right now, if you look at advertising, most advertising has diversity throughout all of their advertisements. Now, if we can have diversity in commercials, why can't we have true diversity in the police department, where there is no harboring or fear of African Americans? And that's what I think there is a connection between fear and the lack of some type of relationship with Black and brown individuals.
Judge, thank you for that. I'm talking to Judge Ronald Gregg, Bobby Kipper, and Dr. Joffrey Mount Varner. We're going to come back and talk about what should Black men and women do when they encounter police officers in situations where they might be just pulled over for a taillight infraction. How should they respond and in order to get home safe? And we'll be back with more of the Kelly Wright Show with these fine gentlemen right after this. Welcome back to the program. So we're talking now with Dr. Joffrey Mount Varner, an ER doctor in the Washington, D.C. area. We're also talking to Judge Ronald Gregg. He is the former Assistant General Counsel to the NAACP National, as well as the head of the Minority Chamber of Commerce there in Staten Island. And then we're talking to Bobby Kipper, the founder and director of the National Center for the Prevention of Violence and Community Violence. And we're talking about what's going on in our country as it relates to the crisis that we've seen through not only COVID-19, but certainly the crisis that we've seen with these police-involved murders, killings of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and we cannot forget Ahmaud Arbery, who was jogging. That case involving a retired law enforcement officer. So, gentlemen, what should a Black man and a Black woman do if they are stopped by police in order to comply and get home safely? Doc, I'll begin with you.
Thank you very much. Let me just say, so I am a decisions expert. I teach executives even longer how to make split-second decisions. And believe it or not, when you are stopped, that is a split-second decision. Let me define that. That's when you have a lack of time, the T, L, the lack of information, and then there are critical consequences. So when you're stopped, there are split-second decisions that are being made. However, because you know that stop is coming, because you are of color, there's some practicing that you need to do even prior to being stopped. And while it's not right and it's not fair, but as my mother's always taught me, you have to deal with the world the way it is versus how it should be. So therefore, if you're a person of color and you are stopped, your first priority, no matter what is going on, no matter how the officer makes you feel, is to decide, make the split-second decision to get home alive. And I say that not just as an ER doctor who like takes care of people who have had violent acts, but as a father, as a son. And I tell my son, and I tell my daughter, if stopped by the police, no matter how they make you feel, no matter what they do to you, if you can just get home, daddy can fix you. But if you're dead, that means that there's nothing I can do. So the first thing I tell them is, do what you do and say whatever you need to do. Be as humble as you can. And I get it. Nobody wants to have to like do that. But the world has shown the way it is. So be as humble as you can. It's not about being right. It's about getting home alive.
Wow, that's you remind me, and I have to personally disclose this. I remember working at another network when I was in New York City, and I received a telephone call from my then 16-year-old son who was crying. And I said, "Son, what's wrong?" And he went on to state that he was stopped on a highway in the dark of night, he and his friend, a white gentleman, a white teenager, and they're both stopped. And he was being stopped for a taillight infraction, yet it took 7 police cars to investigate a taillight infraction. And it just shook him to the core. And I said, whatever you do, pay attention, get home safely, and we'll settle it when I get back. And then we took the matter up with police to find out what was going on and why it took 7 police officers to stop a young 16-year-old honor student, being a judge there in the New York City area, and then being a former law enforcement officer. Certainly you've seen this happen as well to a lot of young African Americans and even older ones who are concerned what happens. And it's Black and brown people who experience this. And I know, and Bobby, to your point, a lot of people don't understand it, and Doc, to your point, but the bottom line is get home safe, get home alive, and then try to de-escalate that situation by going after it from a legal perspective. So Judge, when we come to you with complaints about what's happened on the police department, is that enough to get the system to change?
Well, unfortunately, no. And one of the things that I do, I mentor young Blacks, and I have speaking engagements throughout New York. And one of the things that we try to do is train individual, and it's unfortunate, it's now no longer just young African-American males. Females also are being swept up into this frenzy. And what we do is we train individuals how to respond and get home safely. There's what I call a safety reciprocity. And what that means is police officers, they have a motto: do whatever it takes to get home safely. I say in reverse, for young African Americans, do whatever it takes to get home safely. And I say CA, and that means comply and then acquiesce and find results. So whatever, and I think both gentlemen were saying that once you're stopped, you should, in no uncertain circumstances, comply. with whatever the officers are saying. Once you comply, we tell individuals, try to be very alert. Do not respond in a agitated way. Do not give mouth. Respond to whatever you're asked. If they ask you a question, respond. Give them straightforward answers with no attitude, but also be mindful and alert. Look to see if you could find the name of the individual officer. Look to see if you can find the badge. Also, look to see for the plate on the police vehicle or some identifying monicum so you would know who it is or what type of law enforcement. Many times it's a unmarked car. So what you do is you go through the Q&A, so to speak. Let them ask you the question, you respond. I find it really, really unnerving now. Even myself sometimes, when you see officers responding in a very, very, what we considered, what they called in the community, badge-heavy attitude, they come up to you with an aggressive approach. And the first thing an individual will do, especially if they are innocent of no wrongdoing, they say, why me? Why? And they respond, and the energy that they're expelling, the officer is then taking in and then expelling it back to them. So we try to tell individuals, respond quietly, try to be patient, respond only to questions that are asked of you. Get all the information at hand that you can without addressing the officer that would kind of tick him off. And now we do have the advent of body cams, but the problem is in many jurisdictions, body cams are not available to the public. It has to be subpoenaed. It has to be requested by the law enforcement agency. So by the time an incident unfolds, many times it's too late to see what's happening on the body cam. Yeah. So you just have to be able to respond patiently, calmly, and knowingly by observing everything that's in your purview.
You're watching The Kelly Wright Show. We'll be back with much more after the break. And I hear all three of you very loudly and clearly. There's one thing there's a question on the tip of the tongue of a lot of people who are watching this right now, and that is, well, isn't that what George Floyd did? He complied, and it was stated that he was resisting arrest, but yet if you look at the video prior to the incident that led to his death, he complied. He got out of his car. He complied. He got out of his car, listened to the officers, was handcuffed, and then things went horribly wrong without him resisting, without him causing any, and we've seen this in other cases. So Doc, I know you were making this point in a private conversation with me yesterday. Even though there is compliance, and even though there is the effort to try to get along with that officer and listen to his or her instructions, it can still go horribly wrong. And I think that's the puzzle that really causes a lot of aggravation and frustration and anger. So I get it when people protest. What I don't get is the violence in that protest.
You are so correct. And let me just set this up. As an ER doctor of 25 years, I've watched people die. People come in with end-stage cancer, or they have orders that they don't want anything done. So I've seen that. What we saw from that video, it was horrendous. It was horrible, and it hurts your heart. And so I get it. We're sad, we're fearful, and that fear turns into anger. And believe it or not, it's okay to be angry as long as that anger turns into something productive. It's even okay to protest and march as long as that turns into something productive. And I can tell you, people don't want to hear this now because they're angry. But the most important thing they can turn that anger to is the voting. And I'm not talking about the national election, the local elections. That's most important. As the judge just talked about, it's in the prosecutor's hands. That's a voted person. So in your local elections, turn that anger into voting, because the mayor, the county exec chooses the chief of police, and you vote that state's attorneys in. So if you want to turn your anger, and we should all have some kind of anger, all of us, it's so important that we vote in our next election and our midterms election. And let me just tell you, to the parents, because I am one, I know it's sad and I know it's scary, but what we saw is still, it's wrong, but it's still rare. And so there's still a safety zone out there for our kids. But for us parents, black, white, purple, and green, we got to pull out our videos more and be willing to stop and take a video and watch it until that interaction is done. And especially if you're white. The reason why I say especially if you're white, right or wrong, the officer gives you a little more privilege. So although that person stopped is black, you owe it to us as a society to stop, use your privilege to an advantage. It's not a God-given privilege, but to use that privilege that America gives you and take that video and help our sons and your sons get home alive.
We're going to come back with more of one more segment with Bobby Kipper, as well as Judge Ronald Gregg and Dr. Geoffrey Mount Varner. Back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So we're having an active discussion about the situation that's unfolded in Minneapolis, and we've seen people outraged by it, heartbroken by it, angered by it, and now taking that anger to the streets. And we've been telling people that we should protest, but do it in a nonviolent manner, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. espoused throughout the entire civil rights era. Dr. Geoffrey Mount Varner, I'll leave you with the final word on how we move forward.
We move forward actually in the decisions that we make, especially the split-second decisions that we make. And what I'm talking about is we can teach our kids now, and again, we shouldn't have to, how to de-escalate. Before your kid even leaves the house, before your child, before your loved one, make sure that the license and registration are updated. Make sure the brake lights are working. You want to control the controllable, because while Bobby's right, there are good officers out there. Even if you got 2 bad officers out of 2 million, you're scared that your child and your loved one. So it's the decisions that we make leading up to it, and it's the split-second decisions that we make once happen. And Kelly, I have watched you. So what I've done for free, I've made my split-second decisions ebook available to your audience. They go splitseconddecisions.com. It's free. And if you want some COVID advice, the latest and greatest, it's there as well. But for your audience, for next week, I made a free ebook available to them. But to the moms and dads, continue to be prayerful, and it's okay to be angry and scared now. It's okay. But as long as that anger turns into something productive, we're going to move this ball forward.
Very instructive, gentlemen, all 3 of you. And I think, Doc, on the good note that you said there, continue to be prayerful and continue to be, as Bobby talks about, actively caring for people. And as the judge talks about, bring people to accountability. I appreciate all 3 of you. We'll have to have this discussion again, absolutely, in the future, because I wish we didn't have to talk like this, but we do. We have to awaken the beauty of America and deal with the ugly before we get there. So Judge Ronald Gregg, Bobby Kipper, Dr. Geoffrey Mount Varner, and thanks for the ebook that's free for people to get here on the Kelly Wright Show. So make sure you go to that and get that book. And gentlemen, Godspeed to you. God bless you. And thank you for being part of the Kelly Wright Show today. So welcome back to the program. It's time for a woosah moment. We've been going through so much, and I wanted to bring in my good friends George and Tandra Gregory. What a delightful couple! I love having them on this program as we talk 3 days a week about strengthening the family. And certainly, George and Tandra, if there was ever a time that we needed to strengthen our families, it's a time like now, because all families, Black families, brown families, white families, need to get with their children and their loved ones and say, look, we got to make each other stronger. We got to make each other better, not bitter. We see the protests that's going on. We're outraged by what happened to George Floyd. How do we process this with our kids, with our children, to help them understand how we maneuver through the university of adversity?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of frustrations, a lot of pain, and a lot of hurt, and a lot of helplessness going on during this time. I know my own daughter, she wants to study social justice, and she wants to give a voice to the voiceless. That's her mission in life. And when she saw what happened with George Floyd, after this long laundry list of this is continuing to happen, she started to feel like, well, what can I do? It's nothing that I can really do to change, So there's this sense of we are feeling hopeless and feeling frustrated and just feeling at a loss. So dealing with our frustrations and dealing with our kids is basically just an opportunity for us to really be vulnerable and just really share the emotional side of what we're experiencing, so that we can have solidarity and that we're united as far as how we're being emotionally affected by that. And that's me, I'm always dealing with the emotions, because to truly heal from something is not to push it down, but to actually process out loud what you're going through and receive the support you need as you're going through it.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's presence, right? Meaning most of us are complaining about COVID-19. We're around each other all the time, but to be around each other during these moments is about being there, being present, being mindful. It's mindfulness. And so, there's a big part of me that I just don't know what to do. As an African-American father, you say comply, you say here's what to do, and then you find out you do the things that I was telling my kids, and then they keep repeatedly telling me, this guy did it and he still died multiple times. It's most people are not going to like this, but it's a praying time. It's a praying time, right? Meaning through presence, togetherness, and prayer, I think we just seem closer, a tight-knit family. And not be afraid to talk about your insecurities. We live in Orange County. There shouldn't be any of that, but yet, as an African-American man, I could be running down the street, or I could be coming out of a store and be done like that at any moment. And yet, I don't want us to get into this one incident or two incidents or multiple. We globalize that, and to think all cops are bad, or to think, oh, we got to do something drastic on everything. I think during this time, it's really to be there for our kids, or all of our kids, and to really let them know that we're there, that we want to bring some hope, and yet sometimes we don't know what to bring at the same time.
I want to thank you both, as always, for being on the show. George and Tandra Gregory. Journey for Life is their program. They're relationship coaches. But more than that, they are just people who are trying to help lead the way and help us know the way. And I like how you talked about the challenge to us as fathers, but also the challenge to us as just being a family that gets stronger and gets better. Thanks for being on the show, as always. Looking forward to seeing you Monday. Have a great weekend, and God bless you.
Thank you.
God bless.
Bless.
Back with more after this. So welcome back to the Kelly Wright Show. I'm so delighted to introduce to you, known by so many who listen to All Nations Radio, Bishop Samuel McGill, and he is here not only to talk about his radio host with the most on Facebook Live and other things that you do around that really impact the world with your music. You play a lot of good gospel flavored music, and you're also an author. And it's just so good to have you on the program to share your insights about what we're going through with COVID-19 and other a myriad of issues that we're confronted with. But let's talk first about a new book that you have out. What's the name of it, and when can we get it?
Well, let me do this first. I've been on a lot of shows, and I don't think I've ever been as excited as I am to be on the Kelly Wright Show. So thank you for allowing me. I think I've been on a few shows. I've been on TBN's Praise the Lord. I've been on the Word Network. I've been on TCT Global Television, but I've never been on the Kelly Wright Show. So this is monumentum to me, and it's just a blessing. This book is my baby. It's like, God was doing some things in me internally. And this book was the last portion of what God said my healing and my wholeness would be. And I think one of the dangerous things in ministry, Kelly, is that we're so used to functioning and flowing. I believe the Honorable Bishop Thomas D. Jake said, we lead while we bleed. But sometimes I think we need to pause and really do some service on ourselves in terms of healing and deliverance. And we deal with traumas, and we deal with things that would lead to depression if we stayed in that spot long enough. And so God wanted me to talk about everything from my childhood all the way up to now, because what most people see is the President Barack Obama Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. They see the Stellar Award winner. They see the TV host, the radio station owner, and all of these things. But God says there is a man behind the ministry that I want you to give them a sneak peek of, so that they will be able to appreciate the ministry. And so that's what God did for me. And this book was kind of a freeing of myself. And so many people, we want to tell our success stories.
Yep.
But we don't want to tell that part that may have been traumatic, or that part that, we made decisions that just wasn't wise. But when we look back, there were some reasons that led us to make subsequently the decisions in life that we made. And so, just going through a myriad of things, I said, well, man, I need to slow down, and I need to take care of me.
Well, look, man, I appreciate you coming on this show and enriching our lives with your life story. I know there's a lot more to it, but you went through it well enough for everyone to get the picture that you've been through some things, yet the scars have not wounded you to the point that you can't get up and get started all over again and be triumphant. And then, we want to get a hold of your book, but we also want to listen to you on the radio. So how do we reach out to hear you Monday through Friday?
It's amazing. I never thought that All Nations Radio would be a multiple Stellar nominated and a Stellar Award winning station and have the respect across the industry that it does. Only God can do that. But people can listen to us these ways. We've covered every way. One, they can go to our website, www.allnationsradio.net. Right on the home screen, they'll see Listen Live Now. They can listen that way. Also, they can download our app. It is for free on both platforms. Google Play for Android users, and for Apple users, you can go to the App Store. Simply type All Nations Radio. And then as you move around safely to essential places, you can listen to us in your car. I had to put it like that. You can listen to us in your cars via Bluetooth audio. And we want people to definitely do that. We've been blessed to have a plethora of people across the world that listens to us. They listen to me every morning, Tuesday through Friday on the morning show from 9 a.m. to 11 Eastern. So thank you for all those. I call them my All Nations riders. They've been riding with me now, probably going on 7 years now. Yeah. And so we thank God for that. And then, of course, they can go to the radio station's website as well to get the book. Pre-order. It's a pre-order right now. Just go to allnationsradio.net. You'll see the banner right up on the front screen. I'm going to personally autograph every copy that is pre-ordered. I'm going to personally autograph them, and the pre-orders will go out first.
Well, I'm delighted to have had you on, and I appreciate you sharing your story, and I appreciate you too for the work that you're doing to strengthen the Black community. But in addition to strengthening the Black community, you're strengthening all communities throughout the world. So Bishop Samuel McGill, thanks for being on the program. This is always a home for you. Feel free to come back anytime on the Kelly Wright Show.
Thank you, Kelly, and I'm glad and honored to be called your friend, man. I appreciate you. Keep doing what you do.
God bless you. Appreciate you. We'll be back with more of the show after this. Welcome back to the program. And now for my final word. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for justice by drinking from the cup of bitterness, revenge, and hatred. You see, we must remember that mankind can't survive as long as our hearts beat alive with a hateful rhythm. Love, my friends, comes at a heavy price of forgiveness. And the change we seek will come through continuous struggle to break free from the conditions of our broken hearts. The ultimate tragedy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by good people. And here on the Kelly Wright Show, we will not be silent. We will sound the alarm. We will take a stand, and we will seek to be righted, ignited, and united in spreading not fear, not hatred, but justice, love, freedom, and peace. Good night, everyone. Have a safe weekend.
The color of light isn't red, black, or white, but it's crimson. We all bleed the same. If you don't feel the groove, it's all right. Just give it time, give it time. Come on, y'all. Get on board. Mankind won't survive if our hearts beat inside a hateful rhythm. You see, love isn't bought, but comes with a price of forgiveness, and we all bleed the same. Yeah. If you don't feel it now, just wait. It's coming on, the love train. Just give it time, give it time. Get on board. That means you and you on the love train. Get on board. All creeds and colors, brothers, all sisters and brothers, and sisters on the love train. Get on board the love train. Everyone's invited. We're all united on the love train. Get on board. All creeds and colors, my sisters and brothers, get on board.